The floor-to-ceiling windows of Hayes Corporation's top floor offered a view most men would kill for. The skyline stretched endlessly, glass and steel cutting into the clouds, the city alive with energy. Inside, the air was cool, crisp, smelling faintly of leather and polished oak. On the surface, it was the office of a man who owned half the city, Daniel Hayes, the name that made rivals nervous and investors greedy. He sat behind a desk that cost more than most cars, contracts stacked neatly in front of him, his phone flashing with unanswered calls. Yet Daniel's attention wasn't on numbers, or meetings, or mergers. His gaze was fixed on something far less impressive in material value but infinitely heavier in meaning, a child's drawing taped to the edge of his desk. Two stick figures held hands, their heads large, their smiles exaggerated. Between them, a crooked heart floated above. The crayon colors were smudged, fingerprints pressed into the paper where little hands had gripped too tightly. In bold, uneven letters at the bottom was one word: Daddy. Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The sound echoed in the otherwise silent office. A man who negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without flinching now felt the sharp tug of helplessness. That drawing was his anchor, a reminder of why he worked, why he fought, why he endured endless days that stretched long into the night. His daughter, Emily, 6 years old, with golden hair and eyes so bright they seemed too pure for this world. And yet, she had never spoken to him. Not once. Not a "daddy," not a "hi," not even a single syllable. Her silence wasn't physical, the doctors had confirmed her vocal cords were perfectly fine. No, it was something deeper, something locked away inside her, and every specialist Daniel had hired spoke in the same careful, rehearsed tone: "She'll talk when she's ready." But what if she was never ready? The thought weighed on him like a stone. For a man used to control, used to bending outcomes to his will, Emily's silence was the one thing he could neither buy nor bargain his way through. And it terrified him. He rubbed his temples, pushing away the gnawing ache that came with exhaustion. Every night he read her stories, even though she never answered. Every morning he kissed her forehead, hoping that day would be different. And every time she looked at him with that quiet, almost apologetic smile, Daniel's heart cracked just a little more. The intercom buzzed, his secretary's voice brisk and professional. "Sir, the Shanghai investors are on the line. They say it's urgent." Daniel's eyes lingered on the drawing one last time before he reached forward and clicked the receiver. "Tell them to wait," he said, his voice steady, commanding. Then he leaned back again, staring out at the skyline that seemed smaller today, less significant. Because all the power, all the money, all the respect he commanded meant nothing if he couldn't give his daughter the one thing she deserved most: his presence, his time, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at her voice. And so, for the first time in weeks, Daniel closed the contracts in front of him, ignored the phone that wouldn't stop buzzing, and made a decision. He would leave early. He would take Emily to the playground. Maybe there, away from the noise of his empire, he could give her something no fortune could buy: a moment of childhood. The playground was nothing like the places Daniel usually found himself. Instead of polished marble floors and glass elevators, there were patches of uneven grass, faded paint on the swings, and the constant squeals of children running freely, their laughter ringing through the crisp Saturday air. It smelled faintly of cut grass and melting ice cream from a vendor. Nearby, mundane details that most parents ignored but felt foreign and oddly grounding to a man like Daniel. His driver had offered to wait at the curb, the black car looking strangely out of place among beat-up minivans and compact cars with peeling stickers. But Daniel had waved him off. He wanted this moment to be just him and Emily. No staff, no shadows of power. Emily's small hand was curled in his, warm and fragile, her grip uncertain but trusting. She wore a yellow dress that fluttered around her knees, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched under her arm. Her sneakers scuffed the gravel path as they walked, each step careful, deliberate. She wasn't the type of child to run headfirst into chaos. She stayed close, eyes wide as she watched the other children. Daniel felt the familiar twist in his chest. He wanted to see her play, wanted to see her laugh out loud like the other kids, wanted to hear her little voice call out for him. But instead, Emily stood still, silent, watching as if the world on the other side of the playground fence belonged to someone else. He knelt beside her, smoothing back a strand of her hair. "Do you want to try the swing, sweetheart?" he asked softly. His voice, the same one that could silence a boardroom, was now tender, almost pleading. Emily only hugged her rabbit tighter, her lips pressing into a thin line. Daniel forced a smile, though his heart sank. He reminded himself not to rush her, not to show disappointment. He had read enough parenting books to know children could sense it, and Emily was sensitive in ways he could barely comprehend. "Okay," he murmured, standing and guiding her toward the sandbox instead. It was quieter there, away from the noisy groups chasing each other around slides and monkey bars. Emily settled on the edge, kneeling carefully, her dress pooling around her. She dipped her hands into the cool grains, sifting sand slowly through her fingers as if testing its texture. Daniel lowered himself onto a bench a few feet away, loosening his tie. It felt strange, almost unnatural, to sit among ordinary parents in his tailored suit, his phone buzzing relentlessly in his pocket. He could sense the curious glances, someone recognizing him, perhaps, or maybe just noticing how out of place he looked. He ignored them. For once, he didn't care about appearances. His eyes never left Emily. She was so small against the backdrop of the playground, so quiet in a world that demanded noise. He worried constantly, was he doing enough for her? Was he failing her as both a father and a mother, since Emily's mother had left before she even turned 3? He remembered the nights Emily cried silently, tears soaking into his shirt, and the helplessness that followed. He had built an empire, yet he couldn't fix his own daughter's silence. But here, watching her scoop handfuls of sand, he allowed himself the smallest sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, being here would make a difference. And then, just as the thought settled, Daniel noticed movement, a boy, running toward Emily with unshaken confidence, his laughter carrying across the playground. His knees were scraped, his hair messy, but his grin was brighter than the afternoon sun. Daniel straightened instinctively, his protective instincts rising. Children rarely approached Emily, they seemed to sense her silence and turn away. But this boy didn't hesitate. "Hey," the boy said cheerfully, dropping to his knees in the sand beside her. "Wanna build a castle?" Daniel's breath caught. He leaned forward, tense, waiting. Emily froze, her fingers still buried in the sand. Normally, she would retreat, clutching her rabbit, hiding behind him. But this time, she didn't move. The boy plopped down in the sandbox with the confidence of someone who had never feared rejection. His jeans were grass-stained, and his shirt bore a superhero logo faded from too many washes. He grabbed a small red bucket without hesitation and began scooping sand, his tongue peeking out in concentration. Emily sat very still, her rabbit pressed tightly against her side. Her wide eyes flicked to her father, searching for guidance, as if silently asking if it was safe. Daniel gave the faintest nod, though inside his chest, his heart hammered against his ribs. The boy turned the bucket upside down, lifted it, and revealed a neat little tower. He looked at her expectantly, his grin infectious. "See, that's the first tower. You can make the next one." Daniel held his breath. Emily's small fingers hesitated in the sand. For a moment, it seemed she would withdraw, bury her face against her stuffed rabbit, and shut out the world the way she always did. But then, hesitantly, almost nervously, she picked up her own bucket. Her hands shook slightly as she filled it with sand, pressing it down the way she had seen him do. Her lips pressed together in concentration, her cheeks pink with effort. When she flipped it over and lifted the bucket, the result was crooked, lopsided, the peak leaning dangerously. Daniel braced himself for her frustration, for the moment she would collapse inward and retreat. But instead, the boy clapped loudly, startling them both. "Perfect," he declared with absolute certainty. "That's the second tower. Now we have a castle." Emily blinked at him, startled. Then, slowly, so slowly Daniel almost missed it, the corners of her lips curved upward. A smile. Small, fragile, but real. Daniel's throat tightened. He had seen her smile before, of course, but this one was different. It wasn't just for him. It wasn't just shy gratitude. It was the beginning of connection. The boy leaned closer, lowering his voice as though sharing a secret. "We should build walls around it. You do that side, and I'll do this one." He handed her a stick, as though it were a knight's sword passed down in ceremony. Emily took it gingerly, her little fingers wrapping around the rough wood. She dragged it through the sand, tracing careful lines, creating what could only loosely be called walls. The boy mirrored her on the opposite side, his movements quick and confident. Daniel couldn't look away. He sat on the edge of the bench, his hands clenched together, torn between hope and disbelief. He had paid therapists thousands to try and coax Emily into interacting with others. Yet here, in the span of a few minutes, a stranger's son had succeeded with nothing but a bucket and a smile. The boy sat back on his heels, brushing sand from his hands. There. Almost done. He tilted his head at Emily, his eyes bright with expectation. But what should we call it? Daniel's heart lurched. He leaned forward instinctively, his breath shallow. This was it, the question that demanded an answer. Emily's fingers tightened around her rabbit, her chest rising and falling in quick, uneven breaths. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her gaze darted to Daniel, and for a moment, he saw the conflict in her eyes, fear, hesitation, but also a deep yearning to step out of her silence. The world seemed to go still. The shouts of children on the jungle gym, the creak of swings in the breeze, the distant bark of a dog, all of it faded into nothing. And then, in a voice so soft Daniel thought he had imagined it, Emily whispered, "Home." For a heartbeat, Daniel thought he had imagined it. The word was so faint, fragile, like a breeze brushing against the air. But the look on Emily's face, the way her lips had formed around the sound, the slight tremor in her voice, told him it was real. She had spoken. "Home," she repeated, a little louder this time, her voice still small but undeniably hers. The sound pierced Daniel's chest, shattering 6 years of silence. His world tilted, every skyscraper he had built, every deal he had fought for, every sleepless night seemed to blur into nothing beside this single moment. It was as if the universe had slowed, holding its breath with him. On the outside, he was a man known for composure, for control. But now his body betrayed him. His throat tightened, his vision blurred, tears welled in his eyes, unbidden, unstoppable. He pressed a trembling hand to his mouth, afraid his own sob would break the spell. Emily looked at him nervously, as if unsure whether she had done something wrong. Her tiny shoulders hunched, her rabbit clutched so tightly Daniel feared its seams might tear. He snapped out of his paralysis, stumbling off the bench and into the sandbox, his polished shoes sinking clumsily into the sand. He knelt beside her, ignoring the whispers of nearby parents who had noticed. His suit pants collected grains of dirt, his tie swung loosely, but he didn't care. For once, appearances were meaningless. "You spoke," he whispered, his voice raw. His hand trembled as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sweetheart, you spoke." Emily's wide eyes shimmered. She hesitated, then touched the crooked towers they had built together. Her lips moved again, and with slightly more certainty, she repeated, "Home." The word landed like a miracle. Daniel's composure finally broke. Tears spilled down his cheeks, his chest shaking with a laugh that was half sob, half prayer. He gathered her into his arms, pulling her close, burying his face in her hair. She was warm, solid, real, his daughter, his miracle. He whispered against her crown, voice breaking, "You don't know what you've just given me. You don't know." Emily tucked her head against his chest, her small hands clutching his suit as though anchoring herself. And for the first time, Daniel didn't feel the weight of his empire pressing down on him. He felt light, alive, whole. The boy, oblivious to the tidal wave of emotion he had unleashed, grinned and jabbed a stick into the sand. "So it's home castle, right? Every castle needs a flag." Daniel let out a shaky laugh, brushing his tears away quickly, though they still shimmered in his eyes. He kissed the top of Emily's head, then looked at the boy, his voice thick but steady. "Yes," he said softly, smiling for the first time in what felt like years. Home castle. And in that moment, the most powerful man in the city wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a titan of industry. He was simply a father, on his knees in a sandbox, holding his daughter as though she was the most precious treasure in the world. Because she was. The spell should have broken after that first word. The playground noises should have rushed back in, the chaos of children screaming, swings creaking, dogs barking. But for Daniel, the world still felt muted, as though wrapped in soft cotton. His ears strained to hold on to the echo of that fragile sound, home. Emily had said it. His daughter. His silent little girl had chosen her first word, and she had given it to him. Not, "Daddy," not, "Yes," not some random sound. Home. Daniel sat there, his arm around her, hardly daring to move. He wanted to lock time in place, to bottle this moment and never let it escape. His chest still trembled with the remnants of tears, but his heart soared higher than it ever had in all his years of success. Meanwhile, the boy seemed blissfully unaware that he had just shattered 6 years of silence. To him, it was just play. He jabbed the stick into the mound of sand, declaring in a proud voice, "See. That's the flagpole. Every castle needs a flag." Emily giggled, soundlessly, her lips parting in a breathless smile, and for a second Daniel thought he might hear another word tumble free. Instead, she picked up a ribbon that had slipped loose from her rabbit's ear and carefully tied it around the stick. The boy clapped and cheered as if she'd just crowned a king. "Perfect," he said. "Now it's real. Home castle is safe forever." Emily's face glowed with pride. She glanced up at her father, her eyes shining, seeking his approval. Daniel nodded, his voice breaking softly. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Just perfect." The boy dashed off to collect more sticks, muttering about building a moat. Emily stayed behind, smoothing the sand with her tiny hands, her focus intense. And Daniel just watched. For years he had feared her silence was permanent, that he would never hear her voice. He had dreaded the future, parent-teacher meetings where she'd sit mute, friendships that would pass her by, birthdays with candles blown out in silence. He had feared she would grow up believing she was broken. But now, with one fragile word, that fear had cracked. Not vanished, but cracked enough to let the light through. She wanted to connect. She had chosen to. And she had chosen him to hear it. Around them, life carried on. A little girl screamed with joy on the swing set. Parents called out warnings about scraped knees. A dog chased a frisbee across the grass. Yet for Daniel, the playground was no longer ordinary. It had become sacred ground. The sandbox, the crooked towers, the makeshift flag, they were no longer just playthings. They were the birthplace of his daughter's voice. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, watching her with a softness no colleague or rival had ever seen on his face. The sharp CEO edges were gone, in their place was a man humbled by a miracle. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't think about the boardroom waiting for him, or the contract sitting unsigned on his desk. He didn't think about profits or mergers or the constant grind of being who he was expected to be. He thought only of this, his daughter, her fragile courage, and a word that meant everything. Home. And as Emily smoothed the sand wall of their castle, humming under her breath in a way that hinted at more words to come, Daniel realized that maybe, just maybe, they were building more than towers together. They were building hope. The sun had begun its slow descent by the time Daniel rose from the sandbox. The shadows stretched long across the playground, soft golden light catching in Emily's hair as she stood proudly beside the crooked towers she and the boy had built. Her rabbit dangled loosely from her arm, forgotten for once. The boy's mother called him over, and with a cheerful wave, he ran off. Emily watched him go, her little hand lifting hesitantly in farewell. When he disappeared from view, she turned to Daniel, her eyes wide, as though waiting for his reaction. Daniel bent down and scooped her into his arms without a word. He kissed her temple, breathing her in, memorizing every detail, the weight of her in his arms, the warmth of her cheek against his neck, the faint scent of soap and sunshine clinging to her. She didn't